Thank you for standing out in the cold. My left foot literally just went to sleep. Thank you so much for enduring this with all of us. Thank you to everyone for showing up on a weekday, and to the organizers for inviting me to speak. So let's just first cheer ourselves for showing up and standing in the cold. So I want to talk about a few things today. The first thing I want to talk about is the issue of trans matters and feminism. And what I want to be clear about from the start is that I'm not talking about trans-inclusive feminism. What I want to talk about is that feminism is always already trans. And that just as feminism has always been queer, feminism has always been trans. So we are not here to say, let's include... Is there something wrong with the mic? Sorry. A little bit. Oh, just a second. Feminism is not about, it doesn't have to include trans. We are not the ones who make that decision. Feminism was always queer. Do you really think those women in the 70s were only going to talk about women's rights? It was always queer. Feminism has always already been trans. So I just want to make that clear, because I think there's been a lot of conversation, right, lately about, including, excluding, and I think we just have to get rid of that bullshit conversation and just move on. Yeah. Let's just do that. Cool. So, I want to talk today, this is 2017, and I think I also want to talk about what it means to engage with capitalism and patriarchy as women and as feminists. And at the end I want to talk, perhaps most importantly, how do we in these exhausting times continue to do our work as feminists, as women, right? As people fighting against brutal systems. How do we do this work without exhausting ourselves, as so many of us already are? So, this is my bedtime. So, as we march and fight today on International Working Women's Day, we march not just for the rights of women, but to reclaim feminism itself. That's right. There can be no concept of women's rights, women's equality, without a concrete sense of what feminism is. This may seem strange to some of us, because after all, you might think, aren't we all automatically feminists? But as you know, a lot of people have very different views, and they will tell you that there are multiple feminists. And I'm here to say today, no, there is feminism. And this is what we mean. And here's what we mean. This is 2017, as I keep saying. But throughout the decades, women's marches have been inflected and influenced by different ideas of what feminism means. There was a time, and I like the fact that this is in the past tense, when queer women were considered outside feminism. There have been times, as recently as this year, when women of color had to struggle to make their way as organizers of women's marches. Yeah. And even in 2017, there are those who would insist that trans women don't belong with feminists, simply cannot be feminists because they are trans women. This is a speech, so let me just cut to the chase. This is bullshit. Yeah! And also, there's also those who say that, all I have to say about that is there's just no place in feminism in a women's strike for those who would exclude any of these groups. This is 2017, again I say. How we understand the category of woman, right, woman in quotation marks, has fundamentally shifted from even 10 years ago, from even 5 years ago. This is 2017, and we must, as women, however we understand that term, understand those shifts as shifts that deepen and strengthen feminism. Yeah. We also, at the same time, have to contend with this very simple and brutal fact. that woman, right, the category of woman is still a category targeted, and by woman I mean anyone who wants to use that category, but that space of woman, right, is still targeted with hatred, bigotry, and misogyny.
Yeah, that's right.
To give you an example from a while back, to explain what that means, in 1997, in one of the most shocking known cases of police brutality, Abner Louima, a Haitian immigrant, was picked up, beaten up, and brutally sodomized, which is to say, he was raped with a broomstick. This kind of assault continues to happen every day. It happens to be one of still the most infamous cases. Alongside, of course, the countless rapes of women, trans, non-gender conforming people as well. But I want to point to today what it means for men, male representatives of the state, to effectively rape another man under such conditions. Conditions where it becomes obvious that the intent was not simply to abstract or extract physical sexual pleasure, perhaps, but to put a man in his place as a woman. Which is to say, cis hetero men like Louima, who continue to face the kind of brutality in the prison industrial complex, alongside women, alongside gay men, alongside trans people, alongside gender non-conforming people, are treated the way they are, in ways that put them down in the position of woman, in the category of woman, precisely because that space of woman, as we understand it, is considered the dumping ground for the lowest of the low. Woman, consequently, is still, for many people, I'm so glad I found my stapler today. Woman is still considered a space of complete disempowerment. And when the state, which is to say patriarchy and capitalism, wants to disempower people, it treats them as women. And that is, I think, what sometimes gets missed in a lot of the conversation when different sides have discussions about, for instance, an emphasis on bodies or even the use of the term itself. Those conversations are absolutely important, and they need to continue, they need to go on. All of us, every single one of us, cis, hetero, queer or trans women, cis, hetero, queer or gender non-conforming people, cis or trans men, non-binary people, however we define ourselves, all of us understand this disempowerment of the category of woman in everyday ways. Assault continues to happen every day. It happens to be one of still the most infamous cases. Alongside, of course, the countless rapes of women, trans, non-gender conforming people as well. But I want to point to today what it means for men, male representatives of the state, to effectively rape another man under such conditions. Conditions where it becomes obvious that the intent was not simply to abstract or extract physical sexual pleasure, perhaps, but to put a man in his place as a woman. Which is to say, cis hetero men like Louima, who continue to face the kind of brutality in the prison industrial complex, alongside women, alongside gay men, alongside trans people, alongside gender non-conforming people, are treated the way they are, in ways that put them down in the position of woman, in the category of woman, precisely because that space of woman, as we understand it, is considered the dumping ground for the lowest of the low. Woman, consequently, is still, for many people, I'm so glad I found my stapler today. Woman is still considered a space of of complete disempowerment. And when the state, which is to say patriarchy and capitalism, wants to disempower people, it treats them as women. And that is, I think, what sometimes gets missed in a lot of the conversation when different sides have discussions about, for instance, an emphasis on bodies or even the use of the term itself. Those conversations are absolutely important, and they need to continue, they need to go on. All of us, every single one of us, cis, hetero, queer or trans women, cis, hetero, queer or gender non-conforming people, cis or trans men, non-binary people, however we define ourselves, all of us understand this disempowerment of the category of woman in everyday ways. Encounters is the word bitch. We are all, in that sense, the bitches of capitalism. I mean, sometimes it's great to be someone's bitch. You know what I mean? We all know what that means. But you know what I'm talking about. This is what patriarchy does to us, right? It renders us its bitches. Fuck the patriarchy. Fuck the patriarchy. Thank you. I want to make that clear before I move on to my next point, which is that while we cannot exclude different groups, we also cannot assume, as too many of us do, that there are multiple feminisms for multiple people. There is no separate feminism in the boardroom and a separate feminism for baristas. Yeah. There is no separate feminism for pro-choicers and a separate feminism for anti-abortionists. No. If feminism is to mean anything, it has to confront and destroy the economic conditions that exploit and brutalize all of us. I'm getting sick to work out. If feminism has to mean something that fundamentally ends capitalist exploitation, it has to fundamentally mean reconceiving what we mean by success, what we mean by equality. And if you'll forgive me quoting myself from an older piece, let me tell you what I've said today. But if you'll forgive me quoting an older piece of my... Is this on?
Very fun.
On?
Is it over? Maybe the trigger. On? No. Stand by.
Quoting myself. Feminist principles are not ultimately simply about making things better for women. They're about paying... They are about... They're about paying attention to gender in order... Okay, I'll just shout. They're about paying attention to gender in order to think about policies that makes things better for everyone. Oh yes, conditions better for everyone. So, for instance, a feminism that is simply about ensuring that women at the top, women in boardrooms, get bathrooms with diaper changing stations means nothing if the women and the men and everyone included, if everyone who has to work cleaning those bathrooms and wiping baby shit from the walls, if they get nothing like time off or the ability to place their children in daycare. Male professors get an entire year off to have children means nothing if adjuncts of all genders who get no such benefits, no matter how well paid they are, have to be the ones to fill in for them. about how good or bad we feel.
Yeah.
Have you noticed how gendered presentations are these days? You go to a panel, you go to a discussion, you go to anything at all that especially has women, every single woman is practically required to stand up or sit up and say, I am blah, blah, blah. I am exploited. I have been raped. I have been traumatized. We have to, as women, we have to constantly be identifying through our trauma, through our narratives about how badly we feel.
Yeah.
And in order to help us feel better, we've got this stupid discourse of self-care, right? So everyone is supposed to feel bad, and all they have to do is take care of themselves. About how we feel, because getting us to talk about our feelings is the best way to get us to stop thinking about what we need and demand. We talk endlessly. We talk endlessly about self-care, but we've forgotten that it's capitalism that causes the stress in the first place.
Yeah.
Capitalism that causes our bones to ache so much that we have to spend the rest of the evening soaking in a hot tub, surrounded by, I don't know, lavender and blood orange candles. As a movement centered around feelings instead of politics and economics. The point of today's strike, the point of women refusing to work, refusing to exchange their labor for shitty or mediocre wages that so many of us are paid, is not to infiltrate capitalism.
Yeah.
It is not to change the mind of capitalism.
Right.
To simply make it pay us better, though that's a good thing in the short run, but to fundamentally force people, including ourselves, to imagine and reimagine and imagine again feminism as a set of practices and demands that change the conditions of existence for everyone.
Yeah.
A feminism like that is a feminism that, for instance, understands abortion rights as economic rights.
That's right.
Allowed liberals in particular to co-opt the discourse around around abortion by declaring that women deserve abortion rights because abortion is such a tragedy for all of us. No. I'd be saying no a lot. No. When you deny the unconditional, unquestioned right to abortion to half the population of the world, you are denying them their basic economic and political freedoms. We're all talking about refugees these days. So we've got Pope Francis, who represents an institution. No, he represents a corporation known as the Vatican that denies us our basic abortion rights, but he washes the feet of refugees. Lovely, fabulous. But think about what it means to be a female migrant crossing borders, quote unquote, illegally, or trying to leave one life for another, and to not have control over your own body, to constantly be faced with the threat and reality of sexual assault, or even with the demands of partners and husbands to not be able to decide whether or not to terminate an abortion or even to have the means of access to reproductive control. This is what I mean by feminism needing to always center itself around the economic and the political. And to think about feelings as secondary. So now you're asking, fine. So where do we go from here? I'm going to talk about the simplest ways to move forward. And I'm going to do it by once again situating gender and feminism, right? We center it. We've all been really busy these last few months. But some of us, as we keep trying to remind people, have been at this for a really long time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We've watched democratic presidents boast about bombing countries, about throwing drones at people. We've seen the immigration battle end because I will remind you, a democratic president in 1994 and 1996 introduced draconian new immigration reform that effectively meant that millions of people were pushed into the shadows. This began with the Clintons, a co-presidency, by the way, right? And now all of this trauma, this sense of exhaustion, it's exhausting and we have a long way to go. How many of you are exhausted? How many of you are sometimes so exhausted that you don't know whether you're exhausted or sick? How many of you live in fear and stress all the time? This help lift our spirits temporarily, certainly. They're very important. It's so important to gather in real life and real time. To make us feel like we have a chance of creating a different world. We're all marching and meeting, sometimes every week, as you know. But, and this brings me back to my first point about the category of woman. Who is doing the work in all of this? In organizing, in marching, in putting things together. Who is doing all that work? Who is organizing the meetings? Who is answering the fucking emails? People, answer my emails. Who is picking up the trash in the meeting rooms after the big important meetings? Who's seeing to childcare needs? I organize a lot, Gender Just, we keep organizing events and potlucks all the time, and it's really hard for us to get a substantial number of women at all the events. It's not because women are not political or because they're not concerned. It's because women are at home taking care of sick or dying pets, sick children, ailing parents, right? Ailing friends. As a woman, it's just simply hard to attend meetings in the first place. In the world of organizing towards a better future, we neglect to see, or we simply ignore the fact that this world making and the hard unseen labor behind the scenes is usually done by women. This event has been an exception, by the way. I can't tell you how often I've been emailing and it's back to me, right? And it's I'm sorry, this is just about a point of fact, right, for all of our organizing. So, if we're going to move towards a revolution, we have to reimagine, we have to reimagine and rethink how to conceive of the category of woman in all these different ways. But we also have to look at the very hard, nitty-gritty, behind-the-scenes work. We have to look at how we conduct our organizing and how all of that sometimes falls, not sometimes, too often falls into gendered patterns. The men folk, are seen as the thinkers and the intellectuals, and the women are the ones making the calls, sending the emails, and wiping everyone's butts. This has got to change. Group you're a part of, look at how labor is being distributed. And on that note, I just want to sort of give a shout out to just three of the hundreds of women I know who do all the hard work in this city. Sherilyn Grace, Holly Craig. Sherilyn Grace, Holly Craig, Mariam Kaba. Mariam is now in New York, but she'll always be a Chicago girl. More left.
Yeah.
Dream the absolute impossible. And I will leave you with these words from an anonymous queer pamphlet from the 1980s. There are only two things we know for sure about the coming revolution. One is that we will get our asses kicked. Two, we will win.